So let's talk about airway management in cervical spine injuries. What is the evidence-based decision making? So we are all aware that cervical spine, it extends from C1 to C7, where C1 is atlas and C2 is axis. As we are all aware, it is a ring-like structure which has no vertebral body on its own and supports the skull and allows yes movement, that is your nodding movement occurs at the level of atlanto-occipital joints. C1 and C2. C2 is also known as axis and has a dense odontoid process which articulates with the atlas and enables the rotation movement at the level of neck. Thereafter we have C3, C4, C5, C6 and C7. So the crucial movement that the upper cervical spine is at high risk for getting injuries. So since atlas and axis allow significant movement at the level of neck, it can be vulnerable to instability. The normal space available for the spinal cord is 20 mm. Whenever it is less than 14 mm, it is at risk of causing spinal cord compression. So excessive movement during airway manipulation may cause the risk of spinal cord compression. Therefore, being anesthesiologists, we should aim for precise airway techniques during management of such cases. Now coming to the lower cervical spine, it supports the weight and motion of the body and is also prone to degenerative changes. So whenever there is any trauma occurring due to spondylosis, myelopathy, there can be increased risk of complications. Also compression due to osteophytes or disc protrusion may lead to increased complications. So the common pathologies which affect the cervical spine can be trauma, which can cause fractures, dislocations or hematoma. Degenerative changes such as cervical spondylosis or myelopathy, congenital anomalies such as Klippel-Feil syndrome or Down syndrome, inflammatory conditions such as rheumatoid arthritis can lead to atlantoaxial subluxation. And the symptoms most commonly the patients present with neck pain, radiculopathy, myelopathy or weakness and dizziness. So according to a large review of airway management for cervical spine surgeries, it has been stated that whenever any person is dealing with airway management in cervical spine, the endotracheal intubation or any airway procedure should be done with utmost meticulous care to cause minimal neck movement so as to avoid injury to the spinal cord. And also the anesthesiologist, we should be familiar with the different techniques of airway management and effects on the cervical spine movement during intubation. So in the context of major trauma, we are all aware that the cervical cord can be injured in almost 45% of cases and the incidence worldwide is 250,000 to 5 lakh cases per year. When it comes to developing countries such as India, we get almost 20,000 new cases every year and almost it affects males in the age group 20 to 49 with male preponderance of 4.2:1. Also, these patients can have associated extremities injury, chest injuries, and can also present with permanent motor or spinal sensory impairment. The most common causes affecting cervical spine is secondary to fall from height in almost 53% of the cases and road traffic accidents in 27% of the cases. So now coming to striking the balance between airway and neurological safety. So there was a large systematic review and meta-analysis which has proven that whenever we are going with the airway management and the anesthesiologist, if we see the occurrence of neurological safety issues, so it has been seen in a meta-analysis of 1,177 patients, there are minor postoperative issues in 0.34% of the cases. And in one of the cases, there was upper limb numbness which resolved spontaneously. But it was also suggested that we need to ensure very safe airway management practices while minimizing any cord injury during airway manipulation. So now there is always airway dilemma issues that one should aim for life-saving airway management or spine-threatening cases. So despite a lack of supporting evidence in the literature, airway management in these suspected or confirmed cervical spine injuries, it was traditionally thought to increase the risk of worsening neurological deficit owing to secondary spinal cord injuries or risk of causing new spinal cord injuries. So there has been recent guidelines which has been developed by the guidelines of Difficult Airway Society, Association of Anaesthetists, and British Society of Orthopedic Anaesthetists, Intensive Care Society, and other big societies. They have come up with the latest recommendations, which is published on 3rd of May 2024, and you can scan the QR code to access the same. So what does they suggest? They had prepared an advanced systematic review Delphi process, and they have included the articles from January 2012 till June 2022. With a 3-rounded Delphi process, they developed guidelines, and they included almost 67 reviewed articles, 21 RCTs, 11 cadaveric studies, 10 observational studies, and guideline and expert opinion. And they've agreed on 23 recommendations. And these recommendations, they are built upon the key aspects of airway management, and they have highlighted the recommendations on training, factors, pre-oxygenation, supraglottic airway device, intubation techniques, and emergency access. So let's discuss these in further details. The first and the foremost recommendations which they have made is any patient with known cervical spine pathology undergoing any elective, non-urgent procedures should undergo pre-operative assessment that may include radiological imaging. So let's put that recommendation in one of our patients. So this 32-year-old male, he was a restrained driver and had low speed near end collision. He had symptoms of neck pain with no loss of consciousness and no neurological deficit, with stable vitals, presented to the ED with mild inline cervical spine tenderness, and he was not intoxicated. So how do we deal such cases? So the preoperative assessment in such cases should revolve around screening for the cervical spine instability. Because foremost for anesthesiologists, we must be sure that such patients, they have stable cervical spine or unstable cervical spine. And for that, there are 2 rules, that is Canadian C-spine rule and nexus criteria. And also we need to be sure that such cases have, how is the airway in such cases? These patients may be put on cervical collars, so they may be restricted mouth opening. They can be obese, retrognathic with large lungs and high arched palate. And also sometimes they also present with head and neck injuries, which can limit our airway visualization. The basic preparation for difficult airway management in such cases revolves around the guidelines which are already stated for the difficult airway societies, that we must have a difficult airway card available to us. We must inform the patient with a known or suspected difficult airway. We must assign an individual to provide assistance with a difficult airway, pre-anesthetic pre-oxygenation by mask, and administration of supplemental oxygen throughout the process of difficult airway management. And also ample, that is allergies, medications, past medical history, last meal, events related to injury, as is there for the trauma setting, holds true in this scenario as well. Now coming to the assessment of cervical spine instability. So for assessing the cervical spine stability or instability, there is a nexus code, that is National Emergency X Radiography Utilization Study. So wherein we have 5 points to assess for the low risk or high risk categories of patients. So the low risk categories of patients are those patients who do not have any midline cervical spine tenderness. They are non-intoxicated, they have normal alertness and no focal neurological deficit with no painful distracting injuries. For these patients with these 5 factors, we need not get a radiography. But if the patient has, like in our case, he had midline cervical tenderness, which is true, that is number 1. So in this particular case, we need to get a radiograph done. Then second is the Canadian C-spine rule, which is more specific, wherein there are, we assess for the high risk factors. So the high risk factors, we need to assess if the patient is old age, there was a dangerous mechanism of injury, and there were paresthesia in the extremities. So if any of them is true, we need to get a radiograph done. If any of them is not true, then we need to assess for the low risk factors. So what are those low risk factors? We need to see if it was a simple rear end collision, the patient was sitting in the ED, ambulatory during presentation, there was delayed onset of neck pain, and there was absence of midline C-spine tenderness. So if any of the risk factors is present, we need to get a radiograph. If any of the low risk factors were negative, we need to rotate the neck actively, and please mind it, we need to rotate only if we have assessed for the high risk factors and the low risk factors. If the patient cannot move their neck, we need to get a radiograph done. And if he is able to rotate the neck and there are no risk factors, we need not get a radiograph done. So again, to remind, in our patient, he presented with midline cervical tenderness, which comes in the low risk factors. So we need to get a X-ray cervical spine done. So now coming to the radiological evaluation. So we need to screen these patients for the atlantoaxial instability using cervical spine flexion and extension, X-rays, and also sometimes we need to get a CT scan and MRI. So the X-ray is done in a lateral view for the gross instability, as we can see in the second image of X-ray, that we draw 3 lines and they should be parallel to each other. But here, as we can see, there is some amount of inflammatory changes which are happening. In the CT scan, we can see the gross bony integrity, and the MRI can tell us about the compression or the ligamentous injury. So now coming to if we need to face mask ventilation in such cases, so we have to make sure that we minimize any cervical spine movement during pre-oxygenation and face mask ventilation. So the normal maneuvers which we do in our routine elective cases like the head tilt, chin lift are not to be done, or they are contraindicated in cases of cervical spine. So what is advocated in these cases is what is known as jaw thrust. So what is the difference between jaw thrust and head tilt and chin lift? There has been many studies which has proven that if we do jaw thrust, there is less flexion extension, less axial rotation and lateral bending at the level of cervical spine. Whereas with head tilt and chin lift, it can cause more flexion extension of the degree of 14 degrees at the level of cervical spine, and also there is axial rotation and lateral bending. Regarding the maintenance of spinal cord spaces, it is well maintained with the help of jaw thrust as compared to head tilt and chin lift, and is considered safer alternative in such cases. Coming to the use of high flow nasal oxygenation. So high flow nasal oxygenation, as we all are aware, it is recommended for the awake tracheal intubation, and also it provides a safe apnea time for intubation to the extent of 44.35 seconds to 129.51 seconds, average being 86 seconds. But during the cases of basal skull fractures, there is a risk of pneumocephalus. So the advocated guidelines say we need to use it with caution in trauma patients, and if the patient is presenting with basal skull fracture or high risk factors, we need to consider alternative reoxygenation strategies. So to summarize regarding the face mask ventilation, we need to minimize the cervical spine movement during pre-oxygenation. If we are using high flow nasal oxygenation, it should be used caution with confirmed skull base fractures, and jaw thrust maneuver is considered safer in such cases as compared to head tilt and chin lift. Now coming to the use of supraglottic airway device. So they should be used only if they according to the airway management needs, but not as an airway device for the purpose of reducing head and neck movement in patients suspected to confirm cervical spine injury. So why they have come up with this recommendation is because some studies have shown that supraglottic airway device, if inserted in a forceful manner, it can cause anterior displacement at the level of C2 and C3. And few cadaveric studies are also suggested that supraglottic airway devices are not the first line choice in unstable cervical spine cases due to risk of excessive force. So there are pros to the use of supraglottic airway device, that they provide high success rate comparable to intubation, and they are effective with immobilized cervical spine with collars, but there is no clear superiority which suggests that these are better. And regarding the con, there are limited data which are available to show its superiority over intubation. And definitely for cervical spine injuries, we require a definitive intubation as well. Also, there has been doubts that which supraglottic airway device works best for cervical spine management. So for that, there has been studies which suggest that the LMA C-track, it causes less cervical movement at C2 and C3, making it a stable option. Fast track, it provides balanced performance with moderate head movement, and CMAC, it provides more head movement and potentially cause less stable cervical spine. Light band, although reduces flexion at C1, C2 and extension, but clinical significance is unclear. So the recommendations say that if you want to intubate through a supraglottic airway device, if it is indicated, there is no specific device that is clearly superior in reducing cervical spine movement or causing successful tracheal intubation. So what the guidelines suggest is the clinician should use supraglottic airway devices that are familiar and available to them in their clinical setting with grade D and strong recommendations. And also the guidelines have favored the use of second generation supraglottic airway device over the first generation supraglottic airway device for the obvious reason that they avoid the risk of aspiration and availability of gastric channel to aspirate the gastric contents. Now coming to the use of intubation, so wherever possible, video laryngoscopy should be used for tracheal intubation in these patients with suspected or confirmed cervical spine injury with grade A moderate recommendation. And however, they have not recommended any particular type of video laryngoscope or particular type of blade for intubation purposes. This needs to be remembered by heart that it is grade A moderate recommendation in these guidelines to use video laryngoscope for tracheal intubation. So why video laryngoscope has been advantages in such cases? Because there have been few narrative reviews which has published that video laryngoscopy reduces the incidence of failed tracheal intubation, especially when we apply manual inline stabilization in such cases. Also, in another observational study, it has been mentioned that whenever there is unstable cervical spine, so video laryngoscopy provides better intubation conditions and provides more comfort and skill to the clinician. Also, if we understand the dynamic forces in clinically unstable cervical spine, so with the use of McIntosh blade, it causes upward lifting force of 50 to 70 newtons, which is equivalent to 10 lbs pressure, and can cause extension at the level of occiput and C1 joint and flexion at the level of C2 and C3 spine. And there has been cadaveric models which have assessed that there is greater cervical motion with DL scope as compared to video laryngoscope. So comparing the video laryngoscope, it causes lesser cervical displacement to the extent of 40 to 50% as compared to DL scopy. But however, lifting force is still present with the VL scope, for which there are recommendations that it should be minimized with the use of manual inline stabilization. Also, there have been many cadaveric studies and radiographic models which have assessed that in cases of atlanto-occipital instability, they have actually created the atlanto-occipital instability in cadaveric models, and they have used DL scopy and VL scopy. So they have found that with the use of DL scopy, McIntosh, it causes reduction in the dural sac width greater as compared to VL scopy. With the King Vision, it was found that there was smaller reduction in the dural width as compared to DL scopy. Also, there has been randomized controlled trial which have proven that if you use CMAC D blade, it provides better glottic visualization as compared to McIntosh. Also, in cadaveric studies of atlanto-axial instability, there has been a comparison between AirTrack, McIntosh and McCoy. However, no significant difference in the spinal canal diameter were seen to visualized in such cases. Now, another recommendations which have been made by the society is that clinician who perform tracheal intubation routinely in suspected or confirmed cervical spine injury, they should receive regular training with the use of video laryngoscope, and please remember, not just video laryngoscope but with confirmed cervical spine immobilization. So they should undergo training with mannequins where there should be cervical spine immobilization, and they should get regular training with the help of video laryngoscope so that they are better equipped for intubating in regular cases. Also, there has been recommendations by the guidelines that clinicians should use adjunct such as stellate or bougie when performing tracheal intubation in patients whose cervical spine is immobilized. So there have been RCTs which have shown to compare between McIntosh and CMAC that when we use stellate, it reduces the intubation difficulty score with CMAC but not with McIntosh. Also, stellate decreases the need for bougie and external laryngeal manipulation in both the devices. Now coming to which stellate should we use. So there was a study in which they have compared CMAC, hockey stick and D-shaped stellate, in which they did not find any differences in first pass success in cases with video laryngoscope in cervical spine cases. So they have advocated that all stellate shape increases the first pass success, and stellate use reduce the need for external laryngeal manipulation. And in all these cases, Philadelphia collar was used to simulate for the cervical immobilization. So now coming to another beam trial, which was published in JAMA, in which they compared the use of Buji versus endotracheal tube in Stillate. So it is a large trial which was conducted in the year 2016 to 2017, and they found that which one was better. So the first attempt intubation success was higher with Buji as compared to endotracheal tube with Stillate. But however, they have also mentioned that whatever technique the clinician are better versed with, they should use that technique for their intubation purposes in the guidelines. Also coming to the use of cricoid force. So the guidelines, they advocate if cricoid force is being used, it should be carried by individuals who have received appropriate training to apply the cricoid pressure. And if there is suspected laryngeal injury, cricoid force should be avoided. Also, one should remove cricoid if there is difficulty in tracheal intubation, and cautious external laryngeal manipulation to improve the glottic glue during tracheal intubation. Now coming to the use of emergency phono. So emergency phono should be obtained in line as they are given with the Difficult Airway Society. So there has been a study which have shown that in cases of pre-hospital combat cricothyroidotomy, 34 patients, they underwent surgical cricothyroidotomy by paramedics, and almost 28 cases they were able to do surgical cricothyroidotomy with success rate of 82%. So the guidelines advocate to the use of emergency front of neck exercise, but in accordance with the Difficult Airway Society guidelines. Also, if a patient is considered at a risk of tracheal intubation and you have the availability of ultrasound guidance, then you can mark and identify the cricothyroid membrane before induction if resources and skill mix are appropriate. But this should be done with cervical collar in C2. Coming to the awake tracheal intubation, however, it is considered historical gold standard. But guidelines say the decision to choose between awake and anesthetized tracheal intubation or to use flexible bronchoscope, it should be made on a case-to-case basis. And one must consider the availability of equipment, patient factors, and the proficiency of the clinician with the technique of using awake versus anesthetized tracheal intubation. Also, why awake tracheal intubation, earlier considered as historical gold standard, has been waned. Why? Because there is no clear evidence which proves that awake tracheal intubation is better than anesthetized intubation. Also, nowadays we have availability of video laryngoscope, which is widely replacing flexible bronchoscopy in such cases. So if the patient has to go for awake tracheal intubation only in one condition, where there is hollow vest braces. So here they suggest grade D weak recommendations as a first line intervention in cases in which there is complete immobilization and we suspect that there can be cases of cervical spine injury. So herein they also advocate that you should use nerve blocks to provide adequate airway anesthesia. Coming to the use of cervical spine immobilization, there are various modalities used for cervical spine immobilization. That is, one of them is manual inline stabilization, the cervical collar, that is hard collar or tape around the forehead, or sandbags on either side, or spine cord or trolley, or tape tied to the trolley. But the most commonly used ones are the Mills and cervical collars. So Mills is considered superior for minimizing the spinal movement during intubation, because it has been seen that the use of cervical collars, they can restrict the laryngoscopic view, increasing the difficulty during intubation. And it was seen in a randomized control trial that there was a restriction of mouth opening from 41 mm to 26 mm with the use of cervical collar. So what is advocated is that during tracheal intubation attempts, a semi-rigid or rigid cervical collar should be removed, which can be done most easily by only removing the anterior part of the collar. And this will also help minimize any movement to the cervical spine. Coming to the use of manual inline stabilization, since it can worsen glottic view and there is very limited evidence suggesting that it can reduce the risk of secondary spinal injury, so the guidelines advocate if clinicians use Mills, they should have a very low threshold for removal in the event of difficult tracheal intubation. So while attempting tracheal intubation and there is already manual inline stabilization and you find that you're not able to intubate, so it should be removed at the earliest. Now coming to the recommendations for the pre-hospital and military setting. given the limited data in this setting, the airway management should follow the standard algorithms which are relevant to this particular clinical setting with grade D weak recommendations owing to the low literature which is available for these settings. Last recommendation they suggest is one must have multidisciplinary planning and optimization of human factors which are essential before the airway management. That one must prepare our patient well, prepare the equipment well, prepare the team well, and prepare for difficulty with plan A, B, C, D. Also, like how much time they have to implement, what is the diagnosis of problem, and also they should have the options of benefit risk assessment in such cases, and they should need to have a decisive action assigning the task and review as and when required. So last but not the least, I would say the clinician should use a tracheal intubation technique with which they are most proficient, and that is most likely to minimize cervical spine movement in their hands. Prolonged tracheal intubation using unfamiliar or infrequently practiced technique is only likely to result in vulnerable damaged spinal cord injury being exposed to further ischemia. These are the guidelines which have been utmost highlighted in the latest recommendations. Just to recap, we need to minimize the cervical spine movement, use jaw thrust. If the tracheal intubation through supraglottic is advised, there is no specific device that is clearly superior, and they should use supraglottic device that they are familiar with. Second generation supraglottic should be considered, and video laryngoscopy should be used for tracheal intubation in such cases. One must receive regular training for the use of video laryngoscopy with cervical spine immobilization, and one must consider the use of adjuncts during tracheal intubation. If during attempts of tracheal intubation, a semi-rigid collar has to be removed, it should be done by removing the anterior part of the collar, and multidisciplinary planning, preparation and optimization of human factors should be considered during airway management. Thank you for your kind attention.